It goes without saying that international travel took a massive hit last year due to the onset of the coronavirus pandemic. But now that vaccine rollout is at an all-time high, countries such as the United States have opened up with the intention of boosting its tourism sector. And after being cooped up for quite some time, let's just say that travelers are itching to get themselves out there again. But what are some of the things that first-time travelers should know when setting foot in the land of the free? And which topics of conversation should they steer clear of? Before we get into it, make sure to leave a like and subscribe with the notifications turned on, so you don't miss out on any of the new videos we post. Number 1. Keep your hands to yourself. Personal space as a concept can be pretty difficult to understand when it comes to foreigners from countries such as Italy and France, where public affection with a stranger is as normal as flipping someone off in New York. But if there is one hint we could give foreigners before coming to the United States, it's that Americans do not take kindly to the infringement of their own personal bubble. In other words, personal space is incredibly important to United States citizens, who appear to get pretty creeped out when foreigners get too close to them. So rather than introducing yourself with a handshake, hug, or kiss, be respectful and say hi from a distance. This rule is especially relevant in the current times, with social distancing still practiced all throughout the nation. And since Americans are not super jazzed to see foreigners most of the time, thinking that they are probably carrying the virus with intentions of infecting them, you should be doubly careful of not getting too close. We know that it might sound a bit ridiculous, but you really wouldn't want to cause a fuss over something as stupid as not being able to infringe on someone's personal space, right? Number 2, do not expect top-notch public transportation. While expectations of public transport in America are usually pretty high due to portrayals in movies and series, it must be said that these are usually exaggerated in an attempt to move the plot along. The reality of the situation is that the United States is absolutely huge, with public transport often being either unreliable, unavailable, or darn right unsafe depending on where you are. The bigger cities like New York and Chicago often come with metro rail systems that can be trusted to get you to places on time, and taxis that can be hailed at the snap of a finger. But the same cannot be said for those who want to explore the countryside and smaller towns. In fact, you'll most likely struggle to find any form of public transportation as you find yourself outside of the central region of the city. As such, ensure that you have picked up a working SIM card so that you are able to use data to access applications such as Lyft and Uber. This is the only way to ensure that you will be able to get to where you want to be. Although America is considered to be a first world country, there are a great many neighborhoods that as a foreigner, you wouldn't want to get lost in. So when it comes to the exploration of cities such as New York and Chicago, we'd also like to mention that it's probably best to rely on the public transportation system over and above walking. As they say, it's better to be safe than sorry. Number 3, don't forget about sales tax. The United States is considered by many to be the land of the free market, where capitalism runs supreme and results in the rich getting richer, while the poor and middle class find it next to impossible to move up in the world. And while this may not seem relevant to someone touring the country, you'd be surprised at just how many implications this concept will have on you as a foreigner. Probably the most important difference between the United States and some other countries is that the price of items on goods in the United States is not actually the final price that you'll be paying for said items. There is a little thing called sales tax that needs to be added to the majority of purchases that you will be making while over there, with some states in America even adding their own tax on top of this. At the moment, there are only 5 states that do not enforce the addition of sales tax, being Alaska, Delaware, Montana, New Hampshire, and Oregon. So, if you want to be able to buy things without having to math it up, stick to these regions. Otherwise, don't forget about the sales tax, and maybe ask the shopkeeper what the total price of the item will be before warming up to it. Number 4, tipping is definitely a thing in the United States. Something that often surprises Americans is the fact that countries such as Hong Kong and China look down on the premise of having to tip a waiter. This is due to the fact that waiters and waitresses are often paid more than enough in these countries, with the insistence of a tip being disrespectful toward the establishment in question. It is essentially an action conveying that the tipper doesn't actually think that the establishment takes care of its staff. That being said, things couldn't be more different in the United States, where tipping your waiter or waitress is definitely expected. So when you decide to eat out, be sure to add another 15 to 20% to your restaurant bill in respect of gratuity. This is, however, only really acceptable when eating at a sit-down restaurant, as service wages are often lower than minimum wages in some parts of the country. There is no need to tip a worker at a fast food establishment though, where you have been handed your meal from behind a counter. The only time you'll ever be expected to tip a person behind the counter is when ordering a drink at a bar. Number 5. Do not be scared of all the free things you might be given. Because of the tipping culture in the United States, waiters and waitresses often go over and beyond in an attempt to secure themselves a great tip. So do not be afraid when you are offered free goods with more friendliness than you have ever encountered. The attentiveness of Americans in the service industry can be a bit scary to those who aren't used to it, but it's just one of the positives of visiting the land of the free. It's also usually standard to have bread, chips, or salsa brought to the table before a meal, depending on the restaurant, as well as some water. And while it may seem strange, these items will be on the house 9 out of 10 times. Number 6. Smoking in public is looked down on. Although the same might not be true in your own country, smoking cigarettes has become pretty taboo in the United States. So if you don't want people to look at you with hate in their eyes, make sure to only smoke when you find yourself in a smoking section. Most restaurants or bars will have these, often separating the smokers and non-smokers from one another. Suffice it to say, the American population has finally woken up to the ill effects of secondhand smoke, which is why smokers are often looked at with such disdain. Funny enough, the same cannot really be said for smokers of marijuana nowadays. To be honest, obviously depending on the state that you find yourself in. But when it comes to smoking of any kind, look up the laws of the state and make sure how far away from entrances of buildings you have to be in order to be able to smoke outside. Or just wait until you are alone and not bothering anyone in the process. Number 7. Don't buy alcohol if you are underage. For those of you who don't know, the United States has a strange selection of laws which differentiate people based on their age. While the legal age of drinking in most countries is 18, the same cannot be said for the United States, where you can drive legally at the age of 16 but cannot drink until you reach the age of 21. So if you are a first-time traveler to the United States and find yourself over the age of 18, beware of both ordering and buying alcohol, as you will not be allowed to do so unless you are above the age of 21. And this remains true regardless of the laws that are applicable to you in your own country. It also goes without saying that you'll have to take either your ID or passport with you at all times because of this ridiculous law. At least this way you'll be able to show that you are over the age of 21 when trying to buy alcohol. And don't get mad at the person preventing you from doing so if you haven't followed these steps, as they can be fired if they are caught selling alcohol to minors. Number 8. Forget about the metric system. For some or other reason, Americans absolutely hate the metric system, with very few members of the public being familiar with the concepts of meters and liters. So before you decide to make your way over to the US, it might be best to familiarize yourself with the imperial system, as you'll be buying products in gallons and pounds while there. And if you forget, a simple Google search will do you well. Number 9. Stay away from politics. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that America is pretty divided when it comes to politics. So when it comes to conversing with townsfolk, be sure to stay away from topics such as gun control and Black Lives Matter. Topics such as these are considered by many to be pretty controversial. It must always be said that many Americans are devoutly Christian, so try to stay away from jokes on the topic or the general questioning of faith. Number 10. Don't think that Americans are being rude when moving on. Last but not least, it must be said that the majority of Americans have often been construed as being rude when this is nothing more than a cultural difference. A great example is the question, "How are you?" which is less of a question in the US and more of a greeting. So don't feel bad if you're asked the question, with the conversation moving on before you're able to even answer. So what do you think of our tips for first-time travelers? Be sure to let us know in the comment section down below.